This is the new Hasselblad X2D II, and we're going to see exactly what has been upgraded on this camera 3 years after the original X2D was released, and whether it was worth the wait. So I have owned the original X2D ever since it was released back in September of 2022, and I can reveal that the single most frustrating thing about this camera is the autofocus. It had a pretty average phase detection system with single focus point, which struggled in low light and often hunted around before fixing on the subject. I mean, it didn't even have zones, and we had to wait about 15 months before a firmware update introduced face detection AF. The new X2D II comes with a huge upgrade in the autofocus department. We now have continuous autofocus with subject recognition for human face, including eye focusing, plus what's called arbitrary focus tracking, which allows you to half press the shutter button and follow any item in the frame. So whether you're photographing static objects or faster moving subjects, it's unlikely you're going to miss the shot. I mean, I cannot tell you how much of a major improvement the AF system is over the original X2D. You can also track vehicles for those automotive shots with a bunch of new focusing options like expand spot, custom and wide, which now gives us an increased number of focus points from 294 to 425 on the new camera. So a big physical upgrade over the original X2D, besides this staggeringly beautiful paint job, is firstly the all-new folding OLED touchscreen. We now have a more versatile folding action that doesn't become obstructed by the electronic viewfinder and folds downwards for those hard-to-reach camera angles. Why Hasselblad didn't go the full hog and give us a fully articulating screen probably boils down to build quality. The screen is incredibly solid and of the highest quality materials. Now with 1400 nits of brightness and capable of rendering HDR images right in camera. The second big physical upgrade, and my personal favorite, is the addition of the 5-way joystick and custom button. The original X2D had a major flaw in its beautifully crafted design, and that was the lack of any navigating joystick or cursor. You had to rely solely on the touchscreen to position your focus point, and sometimes the touchscreen wouldn't register if you had a cold finger. The new joystick solves this problem and also offers a click action for which you can assign a custom function like zoom. Below the joystick is yet another custom button, which can help you streamline your workflow when you're out in the field. So this new paint job is just sublime, and it's not merely decorative either. It's meant to withstand more daily wear and tear. The hand grip has had a sexy new upgrade too, with materials and pattern. And I think it looks the business compared to the original. So the only thing that hasn't been upgraded is the size of the sensor. It's still 100 megapixels, but with an entirely new sensor, with a lower base ISO of 50. And what this means is that we have even more dynamic range than the original X2D, which had a lot of dynamic range. A staggering 15.3 stops. Right, so we've got a perfectly exposed scene here, and I'm going to deliberately underexpose it by 5 stops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Right. Also, what we can do to help things is, let's go to exposure and exposure simulation. But this is a 4,000th of a second exposure. That's the result. Here in Lightroom is that 5 stops underexposed scene. Turning on shadow clipping warning, we see just how much pixel information is lost, represented in blue. Now just watch this. Dialing the exposure back by 5 stops almost entirely restores the image with minimal noise in the shadows. Looking around the image at 100%, we see detail which should have been lost due to considerable underexposure brought back to life, meaning high dynamic range scenes can be taken with one shot instead of exposure stacking and blending images together. Now, why the huge dynamic range is so useful on the Hasselblad can be explained in this simple experiment pitting my Sony a7 IV against the new X2D II. So the Sony has a base ISO of 100, while the Hasselblad goes down to ISO 50. The Sony 40mm G lens is limited to f22 at its narrowest aperture, while the Hasselblad goes all the way up to f32. Taking an identical shot of moving traffic with the IMAX as a background, the Sony can only manage 1/10 of a second with the limitations of aperture and ISO. Switching over to the X2D2 with its lower base ISO of 50 and an aperture of f32, we can achieve 0.6 of a second exposure and get these dreamy motion blur effects. The Hasselblad offers a much more professional looking slow shutter image, handheld at 0.6 of a second, and in case you're wondering, the static detail in the image is very sharp, even at f32. I mean, this is a great camera, I own it, but what the Hasselblad can do without any tripod or ND filter is pretty exceptional. So yet another upgrade over its predecessor is the IBIS system, or in-body image stabilisation. What the original camera could achieve in this department was industry leading. 7 stops of image stabilisation, which could handle long exposures up to 1 second without a tripod. In 2025, Hasselblad have decided to take out the competition completely with a whopping 10 stops of image stabilisation. Now, I've tested this extensively and it equates to a comfortable 2.5 to 3 seconds handheld long exposures with dramatic results. Zooming all the way in reveals the impeccable sharpness for the 2.5 second handheld long exposure. And if you're thinking this was a fluke, I shot 5 consecutive images, all with the same results. So let's talk about a new addition to the X2D2 called HDR. You may have heard of it, high dynamic range. Here's where Hasselblad really brings their A game to the table, available for JPEG and HEIF images. So let's choose our image format of, let's go with HEIF, and HDR needs to be toggled on. And let's just see how it handles the dark environment of Eros. Okay, let's just turn off HDR and see what the difference is. These two HEIF images are completely unedited, but with HDR enabled, the right image retains more detail in the shadow areas of his wings and overall highlights and shadow control without looking overly processed. Now, why this is important is if you're on a location shoot with a client or creative director, you can link the camera to the Focus Mobile 2 app and import those images on the fly as you're taking them and show the client in real time what these images will look like, with no basic adjustments required. So using these HEIF images not only have much smaller file sizes than RAW images, they also contain a lot of pixel information, not quite as much as a RAW file, but considerably more than a JPEG, which means better post-processing. So did you see my previous video about the DJI Mavic 4 Pro, which featured a new Lidar system for low light performance? Well, guess what? This new camera also boasts Lidar technology, which bounces pulses of light off of objects in front of the camera. And the main purpose of Lidar is to better see and focus in low light conditions, something that the original X2D struggled with. Right, so I'm going to set the camera into continuous burst mode to see how quick this fires. Using continuous drive mode along with the continuous autofocus with face detection enabled, the X2D2 renders every image sharp in the sequence, compared to the original X2D with only the first image sharp, because of course this camera does not support continuous autofocus. So along with the release of this immensely impressive camera is the 35 to 100mm X2D lens, with a variable aperture of f2.8 to f4 at the top end of 100mm. Zoomed into 100mm, f4 gives us some lovely compression and subject isolation while maintaining crystal clear image resolution. Equally, at the opposite end of 35mm, f2.8 offers that wide, mean-looking perspective for automotive photography. I mean, it is quite a big and beautiful lens, but I'm told to achieve the specifications and optical quality that this lens provides, it should have been much bigger and much heavier. Now, I have used virtually every lens that Hasselblad have made in the last 3 years or so, and I can tell you that this is by far the quickest and most reliable in terms of autofocusing, switching from foreground to background with hypersonic speed using that spot focus. The 35 to 100 is probably the most useful lens as well, with a good focal range from wide-angle landscapes through to portrait work and still life. Now, even though f4 seems like a pretty average aperture, with a 100mm focal length mounted on a medium format camera, we can achieve some stunning out of focus blurry backgrounds. And needless to say, build quality is the best there is. You might expect some wobble when zoomed in and extended to 100mm, but this thing is absolutely rock solid. They've even offered a customizable ring which can be assigned to things like ISO, aperture, or shutter, etc. Other physical upgrades is weight, 60 grams lighter than the original X2D. They've managed to shave off the equivalent of 4 AA batteries while still maintaining the Hasselblad excellence in build quality. And I'm not going to lie, the original X2D was a heavy camera, so any weight that can be spared is a major bonus. Even the battery life has had a 9% increase over the original X2D, but not by changing the battery. It still uses the same high capacity lithium batteries, but the difference lies in how the power is distributed more efficiently throughout the camera's system, even with that extra screen brightness of 1400 nits. So during the testing phase of this new camera, I was given the X2D2 and the 35-100mm for a period of 4 weeks. And afterwards, during my analysis interview with Hasselblad, I was asked an important question. Would this new camera replace my everyday workhorse, the Sony a7 IV? 2 years ago, I would have replied no. The X2D's autofocus system simply couldn't match the reliability of the Sony. The X2D2, however, is an entirely different beast. It's almost an entirely new camera with state-of-the-art technology and an autofocus system which oozes confidence. So yes, the X2D2 is going in the bag for every shoot, no question.